everyone. This is Power N Blaso. My name is Tia Marie, and today I have an amazing guest. You may have seen him on TikTok. His name is Jamezly, and we're going to be talking about the relationship between museums and colonialism. Let's get into it. Yay! Hey, Jamesly, what's up?
Hey, I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing good. So before we jump into things, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us what you're all about.
Hey, my name is Jamezly. I'm 19 years old. A I'm an incoming freshman at the Rhode Island School of Design. I'm currently on a gap year. I make work primarily surrounding Blackness and my experience as a Black person and a Black man. So that's currently what I'm about right now. I don't really have many other hobbies aside from art. I paint mostly, I draw, and I do a little bit of graphic design here and there. But yeah, that's what I'm about.
Yay. And I saw you on TikTok. Your stuff is really, really good. You talk a lot about the relationship between colonialism and museums. It's really cool that you're so passionate about this field as well. You're very informed. So let's get into things.
Yeah. So firstly, I really want to preface some of the things that I want to talk about and like give the audience a little bit of background around art and what exactly the conversation around colonialism and how museums continue to operate in a colonialist manner. And so I wrote an introduction that I'd like to share with the audience to make sure that we all have an understanding of what's going on and some prior knowledge to make sure that we're moving into the conversation. Everyone is informed. So to understand how museums operate in the modern world, we must first analyze the relationship that museums have to colonialism and how they perpetuate these aforementioned systems. Firstly, museums are trusted institutions that house artworks and historical artifacts. Much of the modern day practices of museums is to educate audiences and make connections between the present and the past. This is done in a myriad of ways, from permanent, temporary, and traveling exhibitions, but also through permanent collections. Despite this, the issues plaguing most museums is the debate around the means of acquisition to certain work. To put it bluntly, museums have stolen valued pieces from across the globe. Take, for example, the British Museum of Art, who have hundreds of pieces from the Kingdom of Benin, having been acquired as a result of colonization. There has been numerous calls to return these artifacts back to their places of origin to no avail. In addition to much of the artwork being stolen, narratives have also changed. Colonial powers have at best inaccurately described these works and at worst completely shifted and altered the historical and cultural importance of these pieces. One such example is a show at the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA in New York, with an exhibition entitled Primitivism in the 20th Century Art, which, quote, helped to put the relationship between Western art history and non-Western art into historical perspective, unquote. As a result of these calls to action, the question has arisen, what does it mean to decolonize museums? Does it look like completely gutting collections and returning centuries-old historical artifacts back to their places of origin? Does it look like incorporating settler colonial history into the description of art? Does it look like a completely new form of institution? All of these questions and more continue to be asked from art historians, curators, and the like. These conversations have no clear and all-encompassing answer because everyone has different outlooks and perspectives on what decolonization looks like and whether or not that is an actual objective for these institutions. With that in mind, it is my hopes that this conversation aids in bringing awareness to these discussions and challenges art lovers and the like to question their engagement in relationship to these institutions.
Yay, awesome. And it sounded so fluid as well. You sound so educated, so proud, so proud.
Thank you.
But you did mention the topic of Why can't I ever talk? You did mention the topic of decolonization. Could
Mhm.
you go into depth? What is decolonization? And is this something that's easier said than done?
Right. So decolonization has a lot of different definitions, but what I feel most drawn to and attracted to is first and foremost this idea of reparations.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, moving towards a space where we continue to decolonize not only the work in terms of how it's acquired, but also in terms of the narratives that are that are a part of the work as well. And so, first and foremost, decolonization for me looks like returning things back to their places of origin if they were stolen and not acquired fairly, to put it in simple terms. And secondly, that also means reframing the conversation around these pieces to decenter the Western world and to decenter settler colonial ideas of what it means to engage with artwork. And a perfect example of this is how our relationship to traditional art is oftentimes referred to primitive art. And this is at best a reductionist terms in how we acknowledge and engage with this work, because in a way we are ostracizing the cultural importance and relevance of these works to fit into a blunt and all-encompassing term that doesn't accurately or appropriately describes or articulates the meaning, the purpose, and the significance of these cultural pieces or cultural artifacts. And so decolonization for me looks like addressing all of these concerns while also ensuring that we challenge those in power to, appropriately name, call, or describe these pieces, as well as giving them back to those who, they originally belonged to. And if not, then seeing what can be done to ensure that the originators of these pieces are, properly compensated for their work.
Exactly. And labels definitely play a huge role inside of these artworks as well. Do you mind touching on the Western ideology that European art is equivalent to modern art, while others are considered to be traditional or primitive?
So oftentimes when we reference modern art and what we call the greats, we're often referring to Western art. And for better or worse, not discrediting the significance of these pieces at all. However, as a society, we have continued to censor the West as this shining light upon the globe in terms of like its relevancy in the art world. And something that I touched bases on briefly in one of my TikToks was this idea of the European Renaissance, right? And how we use this term to highlight a very specific period of time and a very specific place without acknowledging that many other cultures prior to and during the time had a resurgence, or in maybe not even a resurgence, but a continuation of great works being developed at the same time that the European Renaissance was existing. And so this is just one of the many issues that I personally have in the art, was this censoring of European white and colonial work, and the reduction of the importance and significance of works that are outliers to that.
Exactly. And I think that this can kind of make people feel uncomfortable in places like museums that show these kind of artworks. How do you think museums are for people of color? Like, is this like a safe space? Who are museums really for?
So that's another important question to ask as well. And so a great example for me as a Black person to use when asked who museums are really for is referencing the Smithsonian Museum of Art in Washington, D.C. And I say that because, yes, history is important, and that museum specifically highlights the history of Black people in this country. But to that same effect, there is a significant portion of our history being retold from a white perspective and a white lens that I personally have, gripes with. And the reason why that is because oftentimes our people were not given the opportunity to retell their stories, or even given the opportunity to engage with their history. And so when I, as a Black person, went into the Smithsonian Museum of Art, I felt a level of discomfort in the way that my history was being told to me, because in a lot of ways it felt like my trauma was being regurgitated for a myriad of audiences to experience. For me personally, I feel very drawn to this idea of connection, not only to myself, but to my history. And so having gone through the museum, I felt a myriad of things: frustration, upset, sadness, and all these other things, while I was amongst not only Black audiences, but white audiences who were engaging with the work and were marveling at the the quality of the exhibition, or like what was being told to them, and really had no connection to the trauma that I personally was experiencing. And so when we talk about who museums are for, it's really important for us to to ask ourselves, what is this museum trying to do first and foremost? What am I engaging with? And who is the target audience? It could be argued that the Smithsonian was targeting Black audience, but to that same effect, they know very well that Black audiences weren't the only audiences that would be engaging with the work. And so you have to ask, to a certain degree, was this history being told in a way that was palatable to all audiences, and to some extent exploitative of the history of black people in this nation? Or was this specifically tailored at retelling these stories back to Black audiences? I would argue that the museum was specifically tailored towards catering and being as palatable as possible, without actually engaging with the history of the people who were being spoken about. You know, it's this idea of like third versus first person. Like, if you and I are speaking, I can speak about you in conversation, or you can be there to tell the story yourself. And so that's kind of like my thought process on it. It was like a retelling of people's history in third person, rather than truly accounting for their lived experiences and allowing these people to retell their stories.
Yes, and then you mentioned like you have like white people that are informing you about it. It only goes to show that museums, they really do heavily emphasize, you know, the academic knowledge rather than the cultural kind of experience.
Right.
And not only that, you mentioned that it was very censored as well. Do you think that this invalidates some of the trauma that people of color have went through? Because I never really noticed this issue with museums, not until I got into high school and everything. We were at the Smithsonian, and I was just like, oh, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right about this.
Right.
But the question being, do you feel like that museums can sometimes invalidate the experiences that people of color are going through?
Most certainly. I feel like at any given moment, feelings will be brushed over and at worst invalidated, because it's like oftentimes we aren't accurate. We aren't given the full picture. That's the best way I can describe it. Like, we aren't even allowed all of the information necessary to formulate our own opinions. And so at once, I feel like it's disingenuous for museums and institutions to, pick and choose parts of the story that they want to tell. But I also think it's reasonable, because for history is very lengthy and not every detail can be incorporated. But to that same effect, what's chosen and what's curated is oftentimes what's palatable to all audiences. And so people of color oftentimes don't have all the information to properly, justify their feelings, because what we're given is oftentimes the watered down versions of what really happened. And we can feel a type of way about that, but we also have to understand that oftentimes history goes far deeper than what the surface level is being given to us at any given institution, whether we want to, whether we agree with that or not.
Yay. And we've talked a lot about the museums and everything. Now I'd like to start talking about some artists. You said that you're an artist yourself. Can you talk to us a little bit about you and your art journey?
Yeah, so I've been creating for as long as I can remember. And I know that's like cliche, but genuinely I've been making art for as long as I can remember, my entire life. And for me personally, art has just been a means of expressing myself. And whenever I go through different phases of my life, art has just always been there for me. And as of most recently, my group exhibition well, my body of work, an anthology of art, was a part of a group exhibition with two people, or a duo exhibition, whatever you want to call it. And that series was me analyzing and, questioning ideas of like my Blackness in a way through art. And so the series comprised paintings and poetry. And this work I felt like was, yes, it was paintings, but it was also poetry as well. Like the two were individual pieces that came together to tell a story. And so with this body of work, I just wanted to investigate different avenues of Blackness through, these different forms of expression, to talk about, my personal experiences, and also to engage with the experiences of those closest to me as well. And and those are all paintings, and that was what happened last year. So yeah, that's the most recent work. And right now I'm just focusing on finding another studio space and doing things here and there, but I'm always drawing and sketching and things like that.
Yay, well, that sounds like a really beautiful and fun project. How long did it take to put all of that together?
6 months roughly. So it was 4 pieces, 4 paintings and 4 poems, and the series took about 6 months to complete. And yeah, they're pretty big too. Like one piece was 6 feet by 4 feet. Other was like, 48 inches by 40 inches. So they're relatively big pieces. So they took a while to paint.
Yay.
But also that was like my first real body of work that I did in that medium.
And what artists do you really look up to? Are there any ones that like really speak to you, that influence your work?
Yeah, so I've only been painting for going on 3 years, so 2 years, and it'll be 3 years in June. And the reason why I started painting, I tell this story all the time, was because of Kehinde Wiley. So I saw his documentary on PBS called A New Republic, and that inspired me so much that I said, you know what, I dropped everything and just picked up a paintbrush. That's that's one of my favorite artists, has been one of my favorite artists, and will probably continue to be one of my favorite artists for as long as I probably can, exist. But aside from Kehinde Wiley, there's a myriad of artists that I look up to and enjoy, and like, look to for guidance, from photographers to painters to, illustration and all that. But I always list these, I don't know how many, but it's always Kehinde Wiley, Toino Jabitola, Kerry James Marshall, Riley Holloway, Charles White, Titus Gafar, Ronald Jackson, whom else? Nina Chanel Abney, and I'm sure there's more. I'm sure there's more, but those are, Nijdeka Akonili Crosby, like, and Charles Barkley, Maliko Mogosi. Yeah, there's so many, but they're all Black artists, and I love their work so much for so many different reasons. But those are my favorites at the moment, and those are just the names I can come up with. But I'm sure if at any given point, like, I'm sure I will continually add to the list, because I love art, and I love, seeing what other people are able to create.
Yay. And those were a lot of artists. I'm gonna need to look into them. I'm gonna have to.
Yes, I will send you a list, because it's a lot, and those are some very thick names.
Awesome. And this does bring us near the end. Any closing statements, any advice you have for the viewers listening in?
I don't know. I guess my biggest piece of advice to anybody looking to make this thing art, like, their career, or like be or are passionate about creating, is just like, make what feels right to you, and be respectful and honest within your work, and don't be afraid to share it. I mean, you could be afraid to share some pieces, because not everything need to be shared, but like, at the same time, don't be embarrassed to be expressive.
Needs to be on a t-shirt or a mug. Okay. Thank you.
I'm tired of the t-shirt industry.
You tired of the t-shirt industry?
Yes. Not all things need to be on a t-shirt.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, thank you so much, Jamezly, for taking the time to be here to educate us. You're on TikTok. Do you mind telling us your socials?
Yes, of course. It's at Jamezly everywhere except Twitter. At Twitter, it's from Jamezly. So FROM Jamezly, JAMEZOY, and everywhere else is just at Jamezly. To the person that has Jamezly on Twitter, count your days, please. Count your days, please count your days, because I am coming for that name. But yeah, it's at Jamezly everywhere except Twitter.
All right, awesome. So you guys know where to find him. Go check it out. Thanks again for being here. And this is Power N Blaso. Bye, guys.
Peace.